and I make this point in my presentation, in my publication, we are thinking about what we are trying to teach people in language learning, which is a communicative competence in being able to take part in social practices where language is used. And in aligning learning and assessment, we should not take our eye off the prize, which is the outcomes of communication and communication skills. And as we look to the future, and this is something this conference can reflect on, what do we understand effective language learning is for communication, and how can we foster that in ways that we integrate the learning moments and the assessment moments into these cycles of learning, and foster feedback and then feed forward into planning new and different, perhaps more personalized ways of engaging. I'm looking forward to the world of no more test dates and no more fixed question papers, ways in which learning and assessment are integrated together in processes which happen on a daily basis, where language learning is taken for us to get in the social process, in language learning friendly environments, focusing a bit more on the multilingualism rather than or plurilingualism, as we like to talk about these days, rather than name identity, or doing a bit of French now, I'm doing a bit of German tomorrow, and then I'm doing my English in a different class. What we're trying to do is not that, I think, and that's not the reality of how all of us use languages. We have a repertoire of language abilities, and when we want to profile them, we want to bring out those abilities and make them evident to people who need to know about it, say for employment or education. But actually, we want to be able to do it in our lives when it comes to talking to people or communicating in some ways. And that, for me, is the prize of LOA, making sure we keep that, at the center of what we're concerned with. Thanks.
Well said.
The globe to join us for this panel, and thank you to the audience. I hope you've enjoyed as much as I have. And yeah, if you have more questions, we'll be around in the conference. Please buttonhole us or our avatars and have a chat. Thank you.
Definitely, I definitely agree with that. Thank you very much to our panel, literally from around the globe, and yeah, do get in touch with them if you want to. Well, good news, we've reached lunchtime. It's 1:45 in Central Europe, 11:45 in the UK, so we will have a break now until 2 o'clock Central Europe time, where we restart with plenary from Elana Sahami. I also want to remind you that we have another session, an extra session this afternoon, which is a repeat of the workshop yesterday from Amy Devine and Tom Booth. They will be redoing that workshop in room 2 at 14:35. I also like to tell you that the rooftop terrace is now open. So if you'd like to join us and have your lunch on the virtual rooftop terrace, then please leave the main stage, turn around, go and find the teleporter all the way at the back of the hall and enjoy the beautiful views from our virtual rooftop terrace. So thanks very much. Have a good lunch, and please also make sure to stretch your physical legs as well and get some screen-free time. See you back at 2 o'clock Central Europe time. Thanks.
Hi everyone, my name is Tony Green from the University of Bedfordshire, And I'd like to thank our other speakers, Li-Ying Cheng, Nick Saville, Jessica Wu, and Alte Gabriel for their contributions.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for your patience as we have dealt with some technology issues throughout the morning. I hope you have managed to enjoy the sessions. We now have our lunch break. The rooftop bar is open. Please do come and join us for a virtual lunch and connection with each other. Don't forget, you can connect up to 17 people in one call. Just click on the avatars to call them. Please do spend the lunchtime having a break away from screens, but if you're feeling up to it, do visit our sponsors and the Scholarship Winners Wall to have a look at the things on display there. Thank you for your time this morning. We look forward to welcoming you in our sessions this afternoon. Our sessions this afternoon will begin at 2 o'clock with our plenary speaker, Elena Xiaomi. That's in the main stage at 2 o'clock. Enjoy your lunch and we'll see you later. enjoying their lunch break, having the opportunity to have a look around the platform and the exhibition area, as well as making use of the relaxation area. This is just a reminder that our sessions will begin again in about 15 minutes. That's 1 o'clock on the main stage, when we'll be hearing from Ilana Shermi on multilingual assessment integrated with language policy. That's at 1 o'clock on the main stage. I also wanted to briefly remind you that Tom Booth and Amy Devine will be repeating their session from yesterday at 2:35 in room 2. So my apologies for the technical issues that we had with their presentation yesterday, but we will be repeating that at 2:35 in room 2. Thank you. afternoon's session of Alte's first International Digital Symposium. We will be starting at 1 o'clock with Eleanor Shomi on the main stage. That's about 7 minutes, so please do start to make your way to the main stage for our plenary presentation at 1 o'clock. Also to remind you that we do have that extra session at 2:35 when Tom Booth and Amy Devine will be repeating their session in room 2. So just as a reminder, please make your way to the main stage where we'll be starting this afternoon's session in 7 minutes. Please take your seats in the audience of the main stage, where we will be beginning in 3 minutes. Again, please take your seats in the main stage, where the presentation will begin in 3 minutes.
Hello, Alana. Hi.
Hi, can you see me? Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. Yes.
Oh, because okay, wait, maybe let me put higher a bit. Now you hear me better?
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah.
Oh, okay, I hear you better. I can hardly see because the light blue is hardly I can see the letters on the title. Oh, wow. What was I talking about? Wait a minute. I hope the slides are in better colors. Oh God, because the white. Maybe I close the curtain here.
Yeah.
Less light. Oh, here it is. Okay, now I recognize.
Begin again in
there we go. That's great.
Okay. So you are Graham. Who are you?
Yeah, I'm the Secretariat Manager of Alte. We met in Strasbourg.
Yes, we did.
Yeah.
Yes, last year, 2 years ago almost. October.
Like yeah, that's
October or Strasbourg was so nice. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Good. Yeah, I recognized you, but I couldn't remember the place where we met. So now it's better. Okay, see if I put the light on. Is it better if I put the light on? Because it's a bit dark here, kind of, because there's so much light, so it's a bit dark.
Yeah, it's fine. I can see you no problem at all. As long as you can see your slides, then fine. It's in the middle. Right, I think it is.
When I have to move the slides, I move the slides, right? With enter.
Yes. Or did you agree with Olivia that Olivia is moving the slides for you? Yeah, Olivia is moving the slides for you. Yeah.
Really? How would she know when to move the slide? Okay. So I'm not doing it. Oh, I think
you just have to speak.
Ask me that. Oh no.
Right. I think it's 1 o'clock. I think everybody is here, which is fantastic. So I'd like to welcome everybody to the afternoon session on this Thursday for the Alte First International Digital Symposium. And our very special guest plenary speaker is Alana Shahami, who joins us here from Tel Aviv University, talking about multilingual assessment integrated in a new multilingual educational policy. It's a very interesting topic. For me personally, it's an area I'm interested in, and I know that all of you are interested to hear what she has to say. So Alana, I'm going to hand over to you, and thank you very much for speaking to us. Over to you. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much, Graham, and it's nice to be here, wherever the here is. And actually, we were supposed to be in Madrid, so Madrid would have been nicer, I guess, in a way, maybe not, but it's certainly nicer than my own desk here at home. So thank you for inviting me, and I'm glad that you were able to do this talk. I mean, to the conference at all, and in this such a sophisticated way, which I'm really not familiar with, but it took me some time to learn, but I think I'm getting to become an expert now. So this is, before I start with the PowerPoint, I'd like to say a few things about, can I go back, Olivia? Or whoever it is? Okay, great. I want to say like 3 or 4 minutes of introduction. I always do that in case I don't have time. At least you get to know what I wanted to talk about. So my issue is really about, probably some of you know my work on critical language testing for a long time. So within critical language testing, what I was always interested in is how tests really exclude people. They don't include everybody. They don't worry much about equality. In my view, they don't worry much about justice. So I wrote much about it. I even have a book, The Power of Test, from 2001, about all those issues, and you can read a lot about it. But what I wanted to say that I'm basically interested in how to make tests more just, more equal, and more inclusive in this diverse world. So the issue, so that's the main thing where I started for. So for many years, I've been worried about people for whom English is a second language, who move to a country. This is immigrants, people who come to Israel, let's say, and they have to learn another language. And in the meantime, all those years, they have to learn in a language that they're not really familiar with. And of course, they cannot really get the content of what is really being taught. So they go behind because they don't have any, I mean, they do have some accommodations, but I'm talking about accommodations both in teaching and in testing. Of course, here I'll be talking more about testing. So I'm worried, but not only about immigrants who come usually with zero knowledge of the second language, of Hebrew in our case, and it takes them, from previous research, we know that it takes them about 9 to 11 years to be in the same level of people who are born into the language. So these 9 to 11 years, and in fact, it takes them sometimes all their lives to really be like a native, if at all. So this is one concern, the immigrants. The other group is other people for whom Hebrew is a second language. And here I'm referring to people who are in Israel. We have 20% of the population are Arabs. And the Arabs are, can you go back to the first, to cover? I don't. Okay, thank you. So for those people, still, I'll tell you when to move, okay? Maybe I can do it, in fact. I don't know, just anyway. So I'm talking about people for whom it's a second language. Arabs in Israel, they learn all in Arabic in schools, and they come to the university and they have to be taught only in Hebrew. Also, when they come to school, sometimes they really learn in Hebrew subjects in the Arab schools because they want to prepare themselves to the university. Also, I'll tell you something else about Arabs. There's a very big difference between Arabs who live in cities such as like Jaffa, which is a mixed city. Both Jews and Arabs live in the city. And the same thing is, in the other group is like what we call homogeneous cities. And these are cities where only Arabs live there, no Jews at all. So it's only Arabic that you hear, except Hebrew, of course, is playing some role as well. So this is the group, and we wanted to see if there's a difference there. So I'm coming to that in a minute. The third thing is about the whole idea of multilingual tests. So I would say for the past 10 years or so, more, I have a paper in 2011 about multilingual tests. I've presented some papers about it in Alte, Ofra Bar and myself. We presented, and Marina Nisnik, and we presented a paper that looked at what do students find, like what do they think about second language tests, about testing, bilingual tests. So bilingual tests are actually tests where you have on one hand one language, let's say Russian. On the other side, you see both the Hebrew as well. So those two versions, and I'll show you an example in a minute. And what we wanted to see is how does it work really on a large scale. So we were very thankful, and the point, no, sorry, before I go to that, we were very thankful because in fact the theory tells us that immigrants or other people who speak another language, they become bilingual, and we are trying not to erase their L1. We want them to continue using their L1. So in fact, they know both languages to different levels, of course. The next thing, so that's the theory behind it. You don't leave your language behind. The next thing is about the idea of multilingual policy. So in Israel, we were lucky. In 2016, the Ministry of Education came up with a proposal to create a new multilingual educational policy in Israel. And lucky, Michal Tenenbaum, his name is written here, and another colleague, and we have a whole team actually, we worked for 3 years on this whole issue of a new multilingual policy in Israel. I'm not going to go into it, but the idea is learning many languages, learning the languages of the others, and so on. One of the major things, of course, is how do you do the testing? How do you do multilingual assessment, especially for immigrants and indigenous students? So we took a ride on this big project that asked us actually to develop this multilingual testing, or we decided, in fact, what are the crucial issues in multilingual education. One of the major things that people don't know how to solve is how to test their knowledge. How to test their knowledge when they don't know the language. How can you filter out what they know and the content they know and the language that they don't know? So this is really what I'll be talking about now. And luckily we call it language policy driven by research. And you'll see a little bit more about it. Okay, the next slide, please. So next slide. Okay, I'll do it. Okay, all right. So Israel basically, and I'll run pretty fast through this. Israel is a multilingual country. Hebrew is the official language. Multiple immigrant languages, Russian, French, Spanish speakers, and language of asylum seekers, refugees, foreign workers, and so on. Also, Arabic, as I mentioned already, is a medium of instruction in the Arab communities in school. 20% of the population, and Arabic is no longer, because of all kind of manipulations of the government, I would say, is no longer another official language, which it had been for 55 years, but it's actually 65, in fact. And now it's called special status. Whatever it means, nobody knows. Okay, the next slide, please. Okay, all right. Okay, so in 2016, as I mentioned, the government advertised this new language policy proposal. Michal Tenenbaum and myself, we won the grant for 3 years. And there had been already in 1996, Professor Spolsky and myself and other people, we introduced a multilingual policy in Israel, but in fact, it wasn't really, didn't really have much of an impact. But the whole idea of multilingualism is very hot in the government's policy, I would say. Next slide, please. Or maybe I should do it. Okay, all right. So what are unique features of the policy? Just in short, we have papers on that and we have reports, what we call engaged multilingual education. In other words, schools create their own policies depending on where the demographies, the partnership between the university and the schools. But the idea that it's not a national, or maybe it's a national policy in terms of English and Hebrew and Arabic, but the rest schools can decide for themselves. Also, it's, as I mentioned, language policy driven by research. And we're working with teachers in schools. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm not going to go much through this, but basically, you see, it started in 2017. Unfortunately, by 22, when we were supposed to, 21, when we were supposed to introduce it, it got postponed because of the coronavirus, because of no government policy, no budget, whatever, a whole mess which Israel is in now. Okay, next please. Next slide. Okay, no, next, okay. So major policy research issues. So there were lots of issues that we could ask when it comes to language policy. We found out that everybody's talking about multilingual policy. Nobody really knows fully what it is. So we came up with a few questions. For example, what do parents and teachers think about multilingualism? We did a research on that. It's already published. Translanguaging in the English classroom. It turns out that teachers and students speak different languages, Hebrew, English, all the time. And translanguaging does happen, although it's not allowed to happen. It has to be English only. So that was the second question. The third question, which is most relevant to us, is the multilingual tests and assessment procedures. So multilingual usage in shared education, like those of you who are familiar with the Irish model, we looked at Jews and Arabs studying together, the effect of heritage and world languages in educational system for multilingual system, and multilingual awareness using linguistic landscape for developing multilingualism for equality and justice. I'm not going to talk about that. And can I have the next slide? And please. Okay, so I want to give you one example, and I'll do it really quick. It's not a testing one yet, but when we looked at what's happening in the classroom in terms of the English classroom, go to the next slide, please. We can see, next slide. Okay, so research themes were, let's say, EFL teachers' beliefs and practices about about the use of the whole repertoire, L1 and 2. Most teachers think the idea of L1 of the student is a bad idea. It should be stay L3, I mean, English. Differences in EFL teachers as a function of language background and so on. Let's move to the next one. I'm kind of worried about time. Okay, so for example, some of the findings we found there, and I'll do it very brief, also learners' language repertoire is a hindrance. So look, you can see many of the teachers thought that it's a hindrance, in fact, to have the learner's language, let's say Hebrew in the Russian class. Others, about half, thought that it's good to use the Hebrew language, the L1 of the students. So all these things kind of came up, and there were differences among teachers in different situations. 80% of the teachers reported they had not studied the topic of using learners' language repertoire in the classroom, not even in pre-service, pre or in-service. So it's a topic, but we decided to research it. We haven't published it yet, but the report is ready. It's ready, and it's a really big issue. Basically, teachers would like to use it, but they're afraid of the English supervisors because the policy of the ministry is still English only in the classroom. And whenever the supervisor leaves, they start using L1 and L2. I'm sure you're familiar with this situation. Next slide, and then again the next slide, please. Next slide. Can I? Okay, maybe. Okay, let's move to the next one also. Okay, so now I want to move to multilingual assessment. Now, next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so research background. It takes, okay, no, back. Okay, it takes about 12 years for immigrant students to comprehend and produce academic content. I already mentioned that. And during these years, the students rely on their L1 to make sense. It gives, if given the opportunities. Yet such options of relying on your home language in Russian or in Arabic in the classroom, in the second language classroom, are almost not there. And rarely do we see any bridging between the L1 and the L2. Next one, next slide. Next slide, please. Okay, here is an example that you can see of a bilingual version. So you have on the left-hand side Russian version of the same test, and the right you see the same test, the same text and questions in Hebrew. So this is an example of Russian, Hebrew, bilingual. That's one next to the other. The next version, when we had the Arab students, we had Arabic and Hebrew on the same page in a way, or two opposing pages. So that's what we're talking about. That's the whole trick. Okay, so next slide, please. Okay, so we've had a number of studies like this already. That study that I wrote in 2011, the study that I did with Ofra Bar and Marina Nisnik, we did in 2018, basically showed positive attitudes toward bilingual tests, and students explained the many functions that bilingualism in tests offered them in terms of vocabulary. In study one, what we found is those students who took the bilingual test, Hebrew-Russian, did by far better than the students who had it only in Hebrew. And the advantage lasted for about 12 years. And I've published it in many, many places, but it shows that we can see that this whole idea of two languages is very, very useful. The fact that we had this language policy project and financed by the ministry meant we could use much larger samples. So let's move to the next one. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay, so we see the current study, 2 research questions. We wanted to see the differences with immigrants. We wanted to find out the issues with Arab students. What really happens when you have the test in 2 languages and when you have it in 1 language? And also in terms of not just the achievement, but also attitudes, self-concept, how they go about doing it, and so on. Next slide, please. Okay, here there were these, we had like quantitative and qualitative instruments, 2 tests, once in science, once in health, bilingual version, and a monolingual version. A writing task, students had to choose, and they could write in L1, in L2, or mixed. attitude questionnaires and interviews, focus groups, and think aloud protocols, the students reported what they were going through while they had the two versions. Next, please. Okay, so here is the sample, 9th and 10th grade, 4 schools that had Russian students, 1 Arab school in heterogeneous city, 1 Arab school in homogeneous city. Next, please. Okay, so what we defined, look, you see that the results are a bit overwhelming. Experimental group, they had the 2 versions, they got an average of 15.3. The control group only got half of that, 8.27. So it's obvious that these students are who need their L1 to be able to perform in different contexts. And many of the students selected Russian versions in both reading and writing. Next slide, please. Arab immigrants. Let's look at the Arab-speaking students in the heterogeneous city, Jaffa. No significant differences because they are actually used to hearing, it's a mixed city, they hear both languages all the time. While in the homogeneous city, where they hear mostly one language, mostly Arabic, in the multilingual version of the content test and writing test, a large number of students selected the Arabic. They found it impossible really to write the test in Hebrew only. And in fact, this is that's supported by a research that Jamie, what's her last name? All of a sudden, kind of blocking the last name. And then that's really something that has been replicated in the literature. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, freedom to choose. What did the Arab students say? The freedom to choose. Students saw great importance in the possibility to choose between the 2 languages. A test in 2 languages, one student said, means that for whom Arabic is easier will use Arabic, and those whose Hebrew is easier for them, they use Hebrew. Next slide, please. Bilingual learning environment, the presence of both languages in the learning environment and their living environment. For example, students talk about how the Arab teachers often explains terms in class, both in Hebrew and Arabic. It's a pretty natural thing. Next slide, please. Most students were in favor of the bilingual exam because it gave them a freedom to choose the language that was more convenient for them. Some Arab students wrote that they were in favor of learning more educational materials in Hebrew because they know they have to use it at universities. Next, please. Okay, so here is how it goes. Type A, a student answered, this is for the Arab, answered the test question and did the writing task in Hebrew. And he had no need to look at the Arab translation of the test or to use Arabic words during writing. This is from the Think Aloud process. The students told us aloud what they were doing. Type B, a student answered the test question and performed the writing task in Hebrew. But he felt the need to look at the Arabic translation in order to understand certain words and terms. The third type, a student answered the test questions in Hebrew and performed the writing task in Arabic. They claimed that in a free expression of their thought and opinion, it was easier for them to use Arabic. Next slide, please. Okay, focus groups of the Russian. We found also, somebody said, the need for translation is so strong for the immigrants, for the possibility that there will be only Hebrew-speaking teachers. Student responded, the only solution is to hang myself, one of the students said, and few students actually. So the Russian teachers mediate the material in Russians, meaning that if there is a certain subject or words that are not understood during the lesson or the test, the Russian-speaking teacher can explain it in Russian, thus contributing to the progress of the students. Bilingual tests, one said it's not appropriate. A small number said they don't like it because they want to learn Hebrew and that will take away from their learning. Next, please. Okay, focus groups in Russian. The current way of assessment is problematic, the immigrants said. We wish the bilingual test will be implemented now, they told us when we ran the questionnaires, the focus groups. We can benefit from it to improve our grades in studies and in the matriculation examinations. Next, please. Next slide. Okay, so you see the same thing. I'm not going to repeat it here, but you see 3 patterns of think aloud. Students, the same thing. The Russian students said something very similar. For example, one said he had no problem, but still he could check the Hebrew. The Russian situation was worse than the Arabic, I must say, because for them, Hebrew is the first time they hear about it. Let's move to the next slide because I don't want to be late. Okay. Next slide, please. Next. Okay, the conclusions. Results point to advantage of the multilingual testing for academic achievement as well as for students' well-being. The right freedom to demonstrate knowledge and not to be penalized for not being proficient enough to manifest it is a problem. Thus, they are included in the learning like everyone else. So they felt very included because they could see their language, let alone the idea that see their language and feel, you know, at home a bit. Next slide, please. Okay, so inclusions, more conclusions and implication. All students perceive the bilingual test as positive strategy that contributes positively to their academic knowledge and to demonstrate what they said, the true academic content knowledge. We are recommending, we were saying from ourselves, recommending to the Ministry of Education to use the multilingual test as major policy of a new educational policy. In 2 years ago, when we finished the research, we actually heard that the general supervisor of the Ministry of Education thought it was so convincing that from now on they're going to do that and implement it. Of course, as I said, nothing happened because there was no government for a while. We had one series of elections after another and no budget, but we are hoping to do it in next year, and hopefully, and it looks like it's going to get the support. Next slide, I think it's the last slide. No, okay, what I'm trying to say here, I'm not going to go into it, but the importance of research to do when you create new language policy. Research is at the core of the process of creating language testing policies in order to ensure their validity and relevance at given moments and situated context. Such policies can be achieved through approaches of what we call engaged language policy, involving collaborative partnership of researchers, schools, and the broader communities. Current work of a student of mine, Anna Gani, she just finished her MA. She's actually validating tests via students' voices. She talks to the students and hear from them about their pains in tests, beyond even the kind of things that we looked at here. So the last slide, please. Okay, this is to say thank you both in Russian and in Hebrew, in Arabic. And I wanted to say that this is something that the more research we collect on this, and the more with using different instruments, we're finding out how useful this kind of assessment is. And in fact, it doesn't take away your home language. In fact, it brings it back together, gives it legitimacy, and gives you credit for using 2 languages and keeping them. Thank you very much. I'm sorry it was such a rush, but okay.
Ilana, thank you very much. No, that's perfect. You finished perfectly on time, and it's a really interesting angle and addition to the multilingualism, plurilingualism that Alte very much supports. So thank you, Ilana, very much. I think we've got time for one question. There are a few questions in the chat, but I don't know if anybody wants to raise a hand and be brought up to ask a question. In that case, please do so now.
You can tell them they can write to me also.
Yes, please do. I think you had Ilana's email there, and there are a few questions here.
All right.
So let me have a look. I'm just picking a question out at random. What protocols are there to guarantee that the 2 language versions are really the same?
Okay, so we work with expert translators. I mean, expert translators who are native speakers of the languages, and they all did it for us, and they did it back and forth. once from let's say Hebrew to Russian, Russian to Hebrew, and so everything is done in that way. So we hope, we still don't know. We never know 100% sure, but it's word to word. It's really the same ideas even.
Okay.
And by the way, those tests, I should add just one thing. Those tests are standardized tests that the ministry were using for national tests in Hebrew.
Okay, great, thanks. Another question from Svetlana here. Did you find any correlation between the performance scores and the candidate's level of proficiency in Hebrew?
Yes, I mean, I could say we looked at, I didn't show that here, but they were, of course, the more advanced they were in Hebrew, the less they needed their L1. So the point is, I claim that they need it always, but for different degrees. I think the first two, we only tested them after a year in Israel, and up to 5 years. And of course, the more they advance, the less they need it. But sometimes they wanted to use it. They say, wow, I keep forgetting my Russian. At least this gives me help. This gives me a source that I can rely on. So I'm not sure exactly. We have some data on that, but we're not. But what is so striking is the emotional thing when you see your own language in a place which oftentimes is not allowed to use it. So there is a correlation.
Yeah. Wonderful. Now, I'm aware that there are some other questions in the chat that unfortunately we don't have time to go into at the moment. Ilana just kindly offered to please get in touch with her if you have questions, or perhaps she'll be around virtually in the virtual environment for you to catch her. I want to say spasiba to you as well, Ilana, for your excellent talk. Thank you very much for joining us today. So we've got just a 5-minute break now before we go into the next sessions. If you stay here in the main stage with me, we have 2 featured organizations, both from the Council of Europe. So do stay with me for that. Alternatively, if you can teleport into room 1, we have a presentation about language educators working online during the pandemic, followed by some more scholarship winning presentations. And then in room 2, we have Amy and Tom's workshop repeated from yesterday, which is what's the point of assessment, making it fit for humans. So come back in 4 minutes to here, or go and teleport yourselves to room 1 or room 2. Thanks very much. And hello, Murat. Lovely to see you.
Good afternoon, Graham. Nice to see you
Great.
again.
Good. Right. I think we're all ready to go on the main stage here.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. So we are now going to have a look at two featured organizations that Alte works with. In fact, they're all part of the one organization, actually, the Council of Europe. We're going to start looking at the Education Policy Division with Ahmet Murat Kilic, who is here today, and I welcome him very much to our digital symposium. And he is going to talk